Have you ever seen someone completely underestimated just because of their appearance? What happened at that military base changed forever the way I see people. An 18-year-old young woman arrived and caused an uproar that nobody expected. Everyone thought they knew exactly who she was, but they were completely wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in September when she walked through those gates for the first time. Fort Davidson had seen thousands of recruits come and go over the decades, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that none had ever caused the kind of stir that this young woman did the moment she stepped foot on that base. I was standing near the main administrative building when I first saw her. The morning sun was casting long shadows across the parade ground, and there was that familiar smell of fresh paint and diesel fuel that always hung in the air around there. The usual sounds of military life were echoing around us. Drill sergeants barking orders in the distance, the rhythmic sound of boots hitting pavement, and the occasional rumble of vehicles moving supplies across the base. Then she appeared. She couldn't have been more than 5'6", with long auburn hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail that somehow still managed to catch the light in a way that made it shine like copper. Her uniform was crisp and perfectly fitted, but there was something about the way she carried herself that immediately caught everyone's attention. She wasn't walking with the nervous, uncertain steps that most new recruits had on their first day. Instead, she moved with a quiet confidence that seemed almost out of place among the chaos of military indoctrination. I watched as heads began to turn, first one soldier, then another, and within minutes, it seemed like every man within a 100-yard radius had found some excuse to look in her direction. The effect was immediate and undeniable. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Drill sergeants paused their tirades. Even the hardened veterans who had seen everything the military had to offer were staring with undisguised fascination. But it wasn't just her beauty that caught everyone's attention, though she was undeniably stunning. There was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on at first. Maybe it was the way she seemed completely unfazed by all the attention she was receiving, or the fact that she appeared to know exactly where she was going, despite this supposedly being her first day on base. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to approach her. I knew Rodriguez well. He was a 20-year veteran with 3 combat deployments under his belt and a reputation for being able to smell weakness from a mile away. He had broken down more recruits than anyone could count, and he took a particular pleasure in making life difficult for anyone he thought didn't belong in his army. "Well, well, well," Rodriguez said as he walked up to her, his voice carrying that familiar edge of authority mixed with barely concealed skepticism. "Look what we have here. You lost, Princess. The beauty pageant is across town." The other soldiers who had gathered around chuckled at Rodriguez's comment, but I noticed that the young woman didn't even flinch. She stood at attention, her back straight and her eyes focused on a point somewhere over Rodriguez's shoulder, just like she had been doing this for years. "No, sir," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "Private Sarah Mitchell reporting for duty as ordered, sir." Rodriguez walked a slow circle around her, the way he always did with new recruits, looking for any excuse to find fault. "Mitchell," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "You sure you're in the right place, Mitchell? This isn't summer camp. This is the United States Army, and we eat little girls like you for breakfast." I could see the other soldiers exchanging glances and smirks. They had all been through this same routine when they first arrived, and most of them seemed to be enjoying watching someone else go through it, especially someone who looked like she belonged on a magazine cover rather than a military base. But Private Mitchell didn't break. She didn't fidget, she didn't look around nervously, and she certainly didn't cry the way some recruits did when Rodriguez started his intimidation tactics. She just stood there, perfectly still, waiting for whatever came next. "Tell me, Princess," Rodriguez continued, his voice growing louder, "what makes you think you can hack it in my army? You ever fired a weapon? You ever slept in the mud? You ever gone 3 days without a shower or a hot meal?" "Sir, I am here to serve my country and complete my training to the best of my ability, sir," Mitchell replied without hesitation. The crowd of soldiers that had gathered was growing larger by the minute. Word was spreading quickly through the base that there was something worth watching happening near the admin building, and men were finding excuses to wander over and see what all the commotion was about. I heard the whispered comments and speculation from the soldiers around me. "She won't last a week," one of them muttered. "5 days tops," said another. "I give her until the first field exercise," a third chimed in. The general consensus seemed to be that this beautiful young woman had made a terrible mistake and would be washing out of basic training before her first week was over. But there was something about her that made me think otherwise. Maybe it was the way she held herself, or the fact that she seemed genuinely unfazed by Rodriguez's attempts to rattle her. There was a quality to her stillness that spoke of real discipline, not just nervous paralysis. Rodriguez seemed to sense it too, though he wasn't about to let up. "We'll see about that, Mitchell," he said, stepping back to address the crowd that had gathered. "Gentlemen, let me introduce you to our newest recruit. Take a good long look, because I guarantee you this is the last time you'll see her looking this pretty. By the time we're done with her, she'll be just another muddy, exhausted soldier crying for her mommy." Bah! The soldiers laughed and whistled their approval, but I noticed that Mitchell's expression never changed. She maintained that same focused, disciplined composure that had impressed me from the beginning. As the crowd began to disperse and Rodriguez moved on to terrorize other recruits, I found myself wondering about Private Sarah Mitchell. There was definitely more to her story than met the eye, and something told me that everyone who was betting against her was going to be in for a surprise. The rest of that first day passed in the usual blur of paperwork, medical exams, and orientation briefings. I caught glimpses of Mitchell throughout the day, and she seemed to be handling everything with the same unflappable calm she had shown during her encounter with Rodriguez. She filled out her forms efficiently, answered questions when asked, and maintained that perfect military bearing that takes most recruits weeks to master. By evening, word had spread throughout the entire base about the beautiful new recruit who had arrived that morning. The dining hall was buzzing with conversation about her, and I overheard dozens of different theories about who she was and why she was there. Some thought she must be some kind of publicity stunt. Others speculated that she was the daughter of a politician trying to improve her image. A few cynics suggested that she was probably sleeping with someone important and using her connections to get special treatment. But nobody, absolutely nobody, came close to guessing the truth. The speculation and commentary continued for days. Every time Mitchell appeared in public, she drew stares and whispered comments. The other female recruits seemed divided between admiring her composure and resenting the attention she received. The male soldiers ranged from openly appreciative to skeptically dismissive, but all of them were watching her, waiting to see when she would finally crack under the pressure. I made it my business to keep an eye on her training progress over the following weeks. What I saw surprised me more and more each day. Not only was Mitchell keeping up with the physical demands of basic training, she was excelling at them. Her test scores were consistently high. Her performance on the obstacle course was impressive, and her marksmanship scores were among the best in her entire training class. But what really caught my attention were the little things that most people missed. The way she moved during tactical exercises showed a familiarity with military procedures that went beyond what any recruit should have possessed on their first day. Her knowledge of military terminology and protocol seemed unnaturally advanced for someone who was supposedly new to military life. And there were moments when I caught her watching the base operations with an understanding that suggested she knew far more about how military bases functioned than any civilian should. The other soldiers were starting to notice too. The initial jokes and predictions about her washing out were becoming less frequent as it became clear that Mitchell wasn't going anywhere. If anything, she was proving to be one of the most capable recruits anyone had seen in years. But the mystery of who she really was and why she seemed so comfortable in an environment that terrified most new recruits was only deepening. Every question answered about her abilities led to 3 more questions about her background. And the way she handled herself suggested that there was a much bigger story behind Private Sarah Mitchell than anyone on that base had yet imagined. The first real test came during the 3rd week of training. It was a field exercise designed to simulate combat conditions, and it had a well-earned reputation for breaking even the toughest recruits. The exercise involved a 48-hour period in the field with minimal food and water, simulated enemy attacks, and physical challenges that pushed every recruit to their absolute limits. I remember watching the groups assemble before dawn on that cold October morning. The recruits looked nervous and excited, the way they always did before their first major field exercise. Most of them had no idea what they were about to face, and even those who thought they were prepared were usually in for a rude awakening. Mitchell was assigned to a squad with 8 other recruits, a mix of men and women who represented the typical cross-section of American youth trying to prove themselves worthy of wearing the uniform. There was Johnson, a farm kid from Iowa, who thought his experience with manual labor would give him an advantage. There was Williams, a college graduate from California who was convinced that his education made him leadership material. There was Peterson, a former high school football player who believed his athletic background would carry him through. And there were others, each with their own story and their own reasons for being there. What none of them knew was that this exercise would reveal something about Private Mitchell that would change everything. But before I tell you what happened during those 48 hours in the field, let me say this. If you want to understand the full story of who Sarah Mitchell really was and why her presence on that base was about to turn everything upside down, you need to stick around until the end, because what I discovered about her identity will completely change how you think about making assumptions based on appearances. The exercise began before sunrise, with the recruits being transported to a remote section of the base that had been designed to simulate hostile territory. The terrain was rough and unforgiving, with thick woods, steep hills, and areas of swampland that could swallow a boot and half a leg if you weren't careful. The weather was overcast and threatening rain, which would make an already difficult exercise even more challenging. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was leading the exercise, along with several other drill instructors who seemed to take a sadistic pleasure in making life as difficult as possible for the recruits. They had set up a series of checkpoints throughout the area, each one presenting a different challenge that the squads would have to overcome, using teamwork, military tactics, and whatever resources they could improvise from their surroundings. The first checkpoint involved a river crossing under simulated enemy fire. The recruits had to get their entire squad and their equipment across a fast-moving stream, while instructors fired blank ammunition and set off smoke grenades to simulate combat conditions. Most squads struggled with this challenge, with recruits panicking under pressure, making tactical errors, and generally looking like the inexperienced civilians they essentially were. But Mitchell's squad was different. As soon as they approached the river, I watched Mitchell take charge of the situation in a way that surprised everyone, including her squad members. She quickly assessed the terrain, identified the best crossing points, and organized her squad into an efficient tactical formation that would have impressed seasoned combat veterans. "Johnson, you and Williams establish a base of fire on that ridge," she directed, pointing to a position that provided excellent cover and fields of fire. "Peterson, you're with me on point. We'll establish the crossing point and provide security while the others move the equipment." The authority in her voice was unmistakable, and more importantly, it was effective. Her squad members responded to her leadership without question, moving with a precision and coordination that none of them had displayed during previous training exercises. I watched in amazement as Mitchell's squad executed the river crossing flawlessly. While other squads were still struggling to organize themselves, Mitchell had already gotten her people across the water and was coordinating their movement toward the next objective. Her tactical knowledge was beyond impressive. It was professional. Rodriguez noticed it too. I could see him watching Mitchell with a new kind of attention, the way he might observe a fellow instructor rather than a recruit. The skeptical amusement that had characterized his attitude toward her was being replaced by something that looked like genuine respect, mixed with puzzlement about where a 19-year-old recruit could have possibly acquired such advanced tactical skills. The second checkpoint involved a simulated rescue mission. The squads were told that a fellow soldier had been wounded and captured by enemy forces, and they had to plan and execute a mission to retrieve the casualty while avoiding detection by enemy patrols. This was the kind of complex tactical problem that typically exposed every weakness in a recruit's training and decision-making ability. Most squads approached the problem with all the subtlety of a freight train. They charged forward with minimal planning, made excessive noise, and generally alerted every instructor in the area to their presence. The few squads that did attempt more sophisticated tactics usually got bogged down in overthinking the problem and failed to execute their plans effectively. But once again, Mitchell's squad stood out. She organized a reconnaissance mission first, sending 2 squad members forward to gather intelligence about enemy positions and patrol patterns. Then she developed a plan that involved multiple diversions, careful timing, and backup contingencies in case the primary approach failed. What impressed me most was not just the sophistication of her tactical thinking, but the way she communicated her plan to the other squad members. She used hand signals and whispered commands that demonstrated a familiarity with military communication procedures that went far beyond anything taught in basic training. Her squad moved like a well-oiled machine, each member knowing exactly what to do and when to do it. They executed the rescue mission perfectly. While other squads were still stumbling around in the woods trying to figure out where the enemy positions were located, Mitchell's squad had already retrieved their casualty and was moving toward the extraction point. By this time, it was clear that something unusual was happening. The other recruits in Mitchell's squad were looking at her with a mixture of admiration and confusion. They could see that she possessed skills and knowledge that none of them had, but they couldn't figure out where she could have possibly learned them. The instructors were having the same reaction. I overheard Rodriguez talking to another drill sergeant during a brief break in the exercise. "There's something about that Mitchell girl," he said, shaking his head. "She knows things she shouldn't know, moves like she's been doing this for years instead of weeks." The final phase of the field exercise was designed to be the ultimate test. The squads were given a complex mission that required them to assault a fortified position, secure valuable intelligence, and then conduct a fighting withdrawal while under heavy enemy fire. It was the kind of scenario that separated the recruits, who had what it took to be soldiers, from those who were just playing dress-up in military uniforms. Most of the squads fell apart during this phase. The stress of simulated combat, combined with exhaustion from 2 days in the field, exposed every weakness and limitation that the recruits possessed. Squads that had performed adequately during simpler exercises completely collapsed under the pressure of this more complex challenge. But Mitchell's squad executed the mission with a level of precision and coordination that left everyone watching them speechless. Mitchell coordinated the assault like a seasoned combat veteran, using advanced tactics and techniques that demonstrated a level of military expertise that should have been impossible for someone her age and experience level. She organized her squad into coordinated fire teams, established overlapping fields of fire, and conducted the assault using proper military procedures that most recruits wouldn't learn until much later in their training. During the withdrawal phase, she managed her squad's movement with the kind of tactical awareness that typically took years of experience to develop. When the exercise was finally over and all the squads had returned to base, there was an unmistakable buzz of excitement and speculation among both the recruits and the instructors. Everyone had witnessed something extraordinary, but nobody could explain what they had seen. Rodriguez approached Mitchell after the debriefing, and I could see that his entire attitude toward her had changed. The patronizing skepticism was gone, replaced by the kind of professional respect that he typically reserved for fellow instructors and experienced soldiers. "Mitchell," he said, his voice serious and thoughtful, "where exactly did you learn to do all that?" Mitchell maintained her perfectly disciplined military bearing, but I thought I detected the slightest hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Sir, I learned it from the best instructors the Army has to offer, sir." It was a perfectly correct military response, but it didn't answer the underlying question that everyone was asking. How had a 19-year-old recruit acquired the kind of advanced tactical knowledge and leadership skills that she had displayed during the field exercise? That night, as I lay in my bunk thinking about everything I had witnessed, I realized that the mystery of Private Sarah Mitchell was far from solved. If anything, her performance during the field exercise had only deepened the questions about who she really was and why she was there. The young woman who had walked through the gates of Fort Davidson a few weeks earlier was clearly much more than she appeared to be, and I had a feeling that the truth about her identity was going to surprise everyone on that base. But even I, with all my years of experience and my growing suspicion that there was more to Mitchell's story than met the eye, could never have guessed the real reason why she was so comfortable with military life, or why her tactical knowledge was so advanced for someone her age. The truth, when it finally came out, would explain everything. And it would prove that sometimes the most obvious explanation is also the most completely wrong. As the weeks continued to pass, Mitchell's reputation on the base continued to grow. Word of her exceptional performance during the field exercise had spread throughout Fort Davidson, and she had become something of a legend among both the recruits and the instructors. But rather than basking in the attention, she seemed to maintain the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her behavior from day one. I continued to watch her progress with fascination. Her test scores remained consistently excellent across all areas of military training. Her physical fitness scores were among the highest in her class. Her weapons proficiency was outstanding, and her knowledge of military history and tactics was encyclopedic. But perhaps most impressive of all was her natural leadership ability, which seemed to inspire confidence and respect from everyone who worked with her. The other recruits had stopped questioning whether she belonged there and had started looking to her for guidance and leadership. Even the more experienced soldiers on the base had begun to treat her with a level of respect that was unusual for someone so new to military life. It was becoming clear that Private Mitchell was destined for great things in the Army, regardless of whatever mysterious background had prepared her so well for military service. But the mystery itself continued to bother me. I had seen thousands of recruits come through Fort Davidson over the years, and I had never encountered anyone quite like Mitchell. Her combination of physical beauty, intellectual capability, and advanced military knowledge was unprecedented, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a story behind her presence on the base that nobody was telling. I started doing some discreet research into her background, using the resources available to me through my position on the base. What I found only deepened the mystery. According to her official records, Sarah Mitchell was from a small town in Colorado, had graduated from high school with excellent grades, and had enlisted in the Army immediately after her 18th birthday. Her parents were listed as Robert and Linda Mitchell, and there was nothing in her file that would explain her extraordinary military capabilities. But there were small inconsistencies in her record that caught my attention. Her emergency contact information included a phone number with a Washington, D.C. area code, which seemed unusual for someone supposedly from rural Colorado. Her medical record showed evidence of previous training injuries that were more consistent with advanced physical conditioning than with typical high school athletics, and there were gaps in her educational history that didn't quite add up. I began to suspect that Private Sarah Mitchell was not who she claimed to be. or at least that there was much more to her story than what appeared in her official records. But I couldn't have imagined how much more there was to learn about her, or how dramatically that information would change everything when it finally came to light. The breakthrough came during a surprise inspection by high-ranking officers from the Pentagon. Fort Davidson was scheduled to host a delegation of generals and colonels who were conducting an assessment of training programs at bases across the country. The visit was supposed to be routine, but it created a lot of excitement and nervousness among the staff and recruits who would be under scrutiny. On the day of the inspection, I was assigned to escort the visiting officers around the base and provide them with information about our training programs and facilities. The delegation was led by a 3-star general named Harrison, a distinguished veteran with an impressive record of service and a reputation for being both fair and demanding in his assessments. General Harrison was accompanied by several other high-ranking officers, including a colonel named Peterson, who specialized in training evaluation, and a brigadier general named Thompson, who oversaw recruitment programs. They were professional, thorough, and clearly knowledgeable about military training procedures. The inspection was proceeding normally until we reached the training area where Mitchell's class was conducting a tactical exercise. General Harrison stopped to observe the exercise, and I could see him watching the recruits with the practiced eye of someone who had been evaluating military personnel for decades. It was immediately obvious to him, as it had been to everyone else, that one recruit stood out from the rest. Mitchell was leading her squad through a complex maneuver with the kind of precision and authority that impressed even these experienced officers. "Who is that recruit?" General Harrison asked, pointing toward Mitchell. "That's Private Sarah Mitchell, sir," I replied. "She's been one of our most outstanding recruits this cycle." General Harrison continued watching Mitchell with what seemed like more than casual interest. There was something about his expression that suggested he was seeing more than just an exceptional recruit. "Mitchell," he repeated thoughtfully. Then he turned to me with a question that caught me completely off guard. "What do you know about her family background?" I provided him with the information from her official records, but General Harrison seemed unsatisfied with my answer. He continued watching Mitchell with an intensity that was beginning to make me curious about why he was so interested in her. When the tactical exercise was completed, General Harrison made an unusual request. He asked to speak with Private Mitchell personally, which was not part of the normal inspection routine. I arranged for Mitchell to report to the conference room where the visiting officers were conducting their assessment. I wasn't present for the conversation between General Harrison and Private Mitchell, but I could see them talking through the window of the conference room. What I observed was remarkable. Mitchell maintained her perfect military bearing throughout the conversation, but there was something about the interaction that seemed different from a typical officer-recruit interview. The conversation lasted much longer than I would have expected, and I could see that both General Harrison and Mitchell seemed completely comfortable with each other in a way that suggested this was not their first meeting. When the interview was over, General Harrison emerged from the conference room with an expression that I couldn't quite read. He seemed satisfied about something, but also concerned, as if he had learned information that required his attention. "Sergeant," he said to me, "I want you to make sure that Private Mitchell receives any special support or resources she might need during her training. She's a very special young woman, and the Army has significant plans for her future." I was intrigued by his comment, but before I could ask any questions, the inspection team was moving on to the next item on their schedule. However, I noticed that General Harrison made one more unusual request before leaving the base. He asked to see Mitchell's complete personnel file, including any classified or restricted information that might not be available to base-level personnel. That evening, after the inspection team had departed, I found myself more curious than ever about the mystery of Private Sarah Mitchell. The interaction with General Harrison had clearly been significant, but I couldn't figure out what it meant or why a three-star general would take such personal interest in a single recruit. I was about to learn that my questions were about to be answered in a way that would explain everything and would prove that the truth about Private Mitchell was far more extraordinary than anyone on Fort Davidson had ever imagined. The revelation came the next morning when I received an unexpected phone call from General Harrison's office. I was informed that General Harrison wanted to speak with me personally about Private Mitchell, and that the conversation was to be considered classified and not discussed with anyone else on the base. When I placed the call, General Harrison got straight to the point. "Sergeant, I need to explain something to you about Private Mitchell that will help you understand why her training is so important and why her presence on your base requires special handling." What he told me next completely changed my understanding of everything I had observed over the previous weeks. "Private Sarah Mitchell," General Harrison explained, "is my daughter." The statement hit me like a thunderbolt. Suddenly, every question I had about Mitchell's advanced military knowledge, her exceptional tactical skills, and her natural leadership ability made perfect sense. "You see," General Harrison continued, "in my family, military service isn't just a career choice. It's a tradition that goes back generations. My grandfather served in World War II. My father served in Korea and Vietnam. I've served for over 30 years, and now it's Sarah's turn." He explained that Sarah had been raised in a military household where discussions of tactics, strategy, and leadership were as common as conversations about the weather in civilian homes. She had attended military schools, participated in advanced training programs for military dependents, and had been exposed to military culture and procedures from the time she was old enough to understand them. "Every one of my daughters has enlisted in the Army when they turned 18, General Harrison told me. "It's not because I forced them to, but because they were raised to understand the value of service and the importance of contributing to something larger than themselves." But there was more to the story. General Harrison explained that Sarah's advanced skills were not just the result of growing up in a military family. She had also participated in special preparatory programs designed for the children of high-ranking military officers, programs that provided advanced training in leadership, tactics, and military procedures. "Sarah could have received a direct commission as an officer," General Harrison explained, "but she insisted on starting as an enlisted recruit. She wanted to earn her rank and prove herself on the same terms as every other soldier. She didn't want any special treatment because of who her father is. This explained why her official records showed no obvious connection to her military background. The family had deliberately kept her parentage confidential to ensure that she would be evaluated solely on her own merits, without any bias or special consideration based on her family connections. "I want her to succeed or fail based on her own abilities," General Harrison said. "But I also want to make sure that she receives the support and opportunities that her exceptional capabilities deserve." He went on to explain that Sarah possessed skills and knowledge that could make her valuable for special operations and advanced military assignments, but that her development needed to be carefully managed to ensure that she reached her full potential. As I hung up the phone after that conversation, I realized that I had just learned the answer to every question that had been puzzling me about Private Sarah Mitchell. Her exceptional performance wasn't the result of natural talent alone. It was the product of a lifetime of preparation for military service in a family where excellence was expected and military service was a sacred duty. But even more importantly, I had learned that sometimes the most obvious explanations are also the most wrong. Everyone on the base had assumed that Sarah Mitchell was just a beautiful young woman who had made a mistake by enlisting in the Army. In reality, she was probably better prepared for military service than anyone else in her training class, and quite possibly better prepared than many of the instructors who were supposed to be teaching her. The story of Private Sarah Mitchell had taught me a valuable lesson about the danger of making assumptions based on appearances. What looked like an obvious case of someone being in over their head was actually a story of someone who was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she had been prepared to do her entire life. In the weeks that followed, I watched Sarah continue to excel in every aspect of her military training. Her secret was now safe with me, and I made sure that she received the support and opportunities that General Harrison had requested, while still maintaining the confidentiality that allowed her to be evaluated on her own merits. She graduated from basic training at the top of her class, earned the respect and admiration of her fellow recruits and instructors, and went on to advanced training that would prepare her for the special assignments that her exceptional abilities made possible. But the most important thing I learned from the story of Private Sarah Mitchell was that you should never, ever judge someone based solely on their appearance or your assumptions about their background. The beautiful young woman who had walked through the gates of Fort Davidson and caused such a stir among the soldiers had turned out to be one of the most capable and dedicated military personnel I had ever encountered. Her story reminds us that people are often much more complex and capable than they appear on the surface, and that the assumptions we make based on limited information are frequently wrong. In Sarah's case, what everyone interpreted as evidence that she didn't belong in the military was actually proof that she belonged there more than almost anyone else. So the next time you find yourself making judgments about someone based on their appearance, or your preconceived notions about who they are or what they're capable of, remember the story of Private Sarah Mitchell. Remember that the most obvious explanation isn't always the correct one, and that people often surprise us in ways we never expected. What did you think about this story? Have you ever been in a situation where you completely misjudged someone based on their appearance? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this real and emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more stories like this one. And I'm already recommending the next video that will surprise you even more.